Our next speaker will be Daniel Foliard, who is a historian whose core interest is on modern European imperialisms and their visual archives. His first book, Dislocating the Orient, British Maps in the Making of the Middle East, 1854 to 1921, was published by the University of Chicago Press. The Violence of Colonial Photography, his second monograph, was published in English by Manchester University Press in 2022. Foliard has developed an expertise in the historical exploration of sensitive material documenting colonial and imperial contexts. He recently published Passé contesté et présent numérique, Contested Past and Digital Presence with Julian Shu. He's currently coordinating a collaborative research project, High Vision, on the application of computer vision to the photographic archive of early news image agencies.
Thank you very much. Amazing to be here, and I think you're going to see the connections between that first presentation and that introduction to a project that it's just beginning right now. We started in January. The funding is coming from a French national agency for research, and you'll see the absolute connection with the kind of questions Chantal just asked. So I'm coming from a historical background mostly, so I'm a bit of a Philistine in terms of AI, and I'm going to explain how we try to build the project in terms of the structure of who is involved as well, not just the research questions and the technologies involved. Just before I start, some of the images you're going to see are somewhat graphic, and some of the vocabulary used is early 20th century French covering of colonial settings, so there are racist words in the captions as well. That's a long list of people involved in that and institutions involved in that program, and we really wanted to be international and transatlantic. In Canada, and the IMC was an obvious partner for us because Thierry Gervais here is a major specialist of early photojournalistic history, and the funds, the collections that are at the IMC are essentially completely connected with what we are going to explore. I was talking about the structuring of a research project like this. We really wanted it to be a very interdisciplinary situation where historical expertise, archival expertise will really join computer vision expertise. So we're very, very lucky to have two major French labs in computer vision. One of them is LIPSIS, which is at Sorbonne University, and the other one is LIPAD, and we've got major computer vision scholars helping us. They are very nice, such as Isabelle Bloch, who is really a world-famous specialist of computer vision. And we are very glad to be able to talk, Chantal was mentioning controlled vocabularies, with archival experts from the Archives nationales, such as Marie-Ève Bouillon, and the Service historique de la Défense. It's a little smaller kind of archive in France, which is located in a very beautiful place. You'll see a photo at the end, the Château de Vincennes near Paris. And that's essentially the photographic collections of the French army, right? The idea is very much not to externalize the expertise and to train people that could have a sort of hybrid profile and that would be able to talk with historians, archival specialists, and computer vision, the computer vision field. So we're very, very lucky to have enough funding for 3 funded PhDs. We started off with internships to prepare them for next year PhDs, and we've got 1 postdoc top of the data pyramid to try and manage all of this, and several internships coming from our own master's degree in visual studies. So if we need ground truth annotations, we can count on history students, visual studies students that are always in a position to discuss the controlled vocabularies and the solutions we can manage. So it's very much an educational training system as well to make sure we get in the conversation going the right way. The corpus is varied, it might change, but we've got 6 major collections. Our focus is really on early news image agency history, right? The archaeology, the very first years of the photo inflation of the late 19th century, early 20th century, and up to the 1940s, 50s with the Black Star collection here at the IMC. So we've got 6 main collections. I'm going to focus on the Forbin collection because it's in the worst state. It's the most interesting because we have no data We have no catalog. We have nothing. So we're starting from scratch, which I think is the most interesting point of entry. Le Petit Parisien is one of the major French illustrated journals. Its collection of glass plate negatives is at the Archives Nationales. It's going to be entirely digitized for the project. And I'm going to explain what we're going to do with it. It's a very specific research question. Bain News, Library of Congress. Agence Roger Violet is another Paris-based news agency. And we are working with other data sets to train the systems. The idea initially is really to go back to the very early stages of the development of an infrastructure of photojournalism and circulation of images. An example I just found yesterday, for obvious reasons, it's going to make me popular. This is from the Agence Roll collection, but we have, I'm going to explain how the Forbin collection works. That really overlaps between the IMC collections, American collections, and the collections I'm talking about right now. I'm preparing for attacks on the French university system and trying to look like I'm slightly belonging to the STEM sector by using very bad analogies with quantum theory. But it works, kind of. Nobody's a specialist of quantum theory. Fine. Okay, cool. So I can use that metaphor. An idea of the project, and we will never, we are going to do some close reading of the images, right? It's very important to us. We've got a blog. We're going to ask all the students, everybody involved, to choose a photo, to read it, and provide close reading of the photos. But part of the project is really to look at these massive images. We're talking literally, for the corpus I described, probably 500,000 photos, to look at them as infrastructures. And we've been talking about infrastructures a lot with AI. And there's a sort of analogy there, really, between the early 20th century and today, with a completely new system of circulation of images developing, and raising issues and questions as to how do you connect to truth, how do you connect to the news, how do you transform images, and how do you inform yourself on what's going on in the world. So I'm using that bad analogy of light as a wave and as a particle, which work kind of well for photography after all. We are going to look at the particles. Obviously, the end game is to make sure the kind of historical writing we can do on the images is careful curation of individual images so that people can take the time needed to understand them. But what's also very important is to try and explore the infrastructural level of that first photojournalistic structuration of mass visual cultures in the early 20th century. And the truth is there's still a lot of work to be done there, because for the Forbin collection, I'm going to explain it, we have no text, right? Literally no ledgers. We don't know who he bought the images from, where he sent it, how he transformed them. So everything is up for grabs, basically, to try and understand that first economy of images. So I'm taking a cue from François Brunet, who was one of the major scholars in our lab. He used the notion of apictorial approach to images, right? So for an instant, forgetting about the visual itself and trying to look at the infrastructural level of the building up of that circulation of images. And it's a pretty cool, is it a photo? Not really, of light as both a particle and a wave, and I cannot explain how it works. That's the Forbin collection. In French, we'd say dans son jus. This was given, donated by a lady 10 years ago. She literally found it in an attic in the suburbs of Paris, where it had stayed for 40 years, almost untouched. Forbin died in 1947 and improvised himself as a sort of early individual news agency, buying images from New York. So every Monday morning, by the steamer, he would send a telegram and ask for photos to be sent from the US to Paris. And from Paris, he would sell these images to the major European French newspapers. Starting in the early 1900s, we need to figure that out. And with a mass of images in 1910s, 1920s, specifically during the First World War. And that's what it looks like, right? So we're digitizing as we speak the entire collection. It's almost done. We don't have the super turning table, so it takes a little more time. As you can see, Forbin has its own system, which was mostly geographical. It's a bit weird. There's a box, women in the US. So he created his own system to try and find the photos. So we're going to keep that layer of organization alive in the metadata. And just to give you a sense of what we have, it's physically very close to what Chantal just showed us, right? Masses of images with sometimes duplicates, with traces of retouching, and on the back, a lot of handwritten information, TypeScript information, retouching information, right? And some of the other collections we're going to tackle are very similar to this. So many questions. I don't understand what we're looking at. What is that? I don't know. And there's no caption. My point is, and I would follow Krakauer on this. With no text, an image like this, with no memory of what it was and what it means, has absolutely no meaning unless you try and project something out of this. I guess it's a sort of respiratory help or something like this to measure. What's the name? I should know, VO max or something like this, right? My point is we want to use AI in a sort of collaborative framework to make sure we get historical answers to what's going on here, right? And to take these fragments and try to make sense of them in a broader and historical environment. So the balance in the project is one that is almost difficult to find, in the sense we want historically relevant questions to be asked. We want an output that is archivally relevant, and we want our computer vision friends to be interested in the challenges raised by tackling that kind of material, right? And I think we're getting there, because the data is very, very messy, just like the one you showed. So you've got traces of retouching on the rectos. You've got indications of origin. You've got different handwritten captions. Forbin has a horrible handwriting. It's worse than mine. And the systems it's resisting the systems, right? So Forbin is resisting Altman and Musk, basically. And the captions are changing from one photo to another. So when you got 3 photos, Forbin sometimes invented new captions to sell them to a newspaper. So I need a photo from Cameroon. I've got one from 1910. It's 1925. Who cares, right? I'm just going to take one and recaption. So we really think the image is not in terms of truth claim per se. We're not relativists, but in terms of process, we're really interested in the sort of organic transformation of the image, and that's how we want to tackle the application of AI tools to the system. So here's another back full of messy stuff. So what we want to try and do with our visual studies students, master students, is to try and segment this with a ground truth data set that could be used probably on your material to make sure we differentiate between the different levels of writing. Okay, so the stems could help us understand where the image is coming from. The handwritten OCR could help us understand how Forbin tried to sell this. Sometimes we've got the original caption. So to make sure we get all the different, the curriculum of the image, right? Its life from beginning to end, even if we're reviving them. Interestingly, it's a racist comments there. Forbin wrote about the fact that he wanted white retouching around the heads of black people to make sure the ink wouldn't spill over, given the roto-engraving process would easily spill over. So we've got a racial history of retouching in the making. And what I want to underline is how, and I think Thierry will agree, the fact of thinking about these photos as mass forces us to look at them differently, to ask different questions that are relevant to computer vision, but also very relevant to historical writing, right? I don't think I would have noticed that specific racialized mention of how retouching can work if it were not for the kind of questions we're asking. The metadata enrichment part is not our worry per se, because it's going to work. The project is going to last 4 years, so I'm not too worried about how transcription is going to work. Okay, we just want to make sure it's traceable and we've got the right ground truth level. So I'm being a bit chauvinistic here. I just used yesterday the Mistral AI, which is a French-based company, and it works pretty well, even as well as probably ChatGPT on this. So you can create automatically. I connected it to Wikidata to make sure we've got a hub, okay, and it worked pretty well. As I said, we're interested in the organic transformation of the images, and we're very lucky with the Forbin collection to be able to see the retouching on the images themselves. So here you can see Forbin preparing this photo for a sort of very Baroque, Belle Epoque kind of prints. The journals would create these very composite images mixed with texts. It's going to be a huge problem for us. What we would like to try is to trace retouching as well, right? To be able to make sure we can identify photos that have been retouched on the continuous tone photos, just like this, and to find them, to find their circulation in the press. And from what you can see here, we've got many photos that are not photos anymore, almost, right? That are so retouched that the idea, when I say photojournalism, you're thinking, okay, truth claim and direct access to events. Very few photos printed up to the 1920s, even to this very day, but the amount of retouching on the photos is just mind-boggling. And the engraving processes were really bad. So we have a huge technical problem in the sense that we really want to try duplicates and near duplicates, and the transformation of the images from the Forbin or roll collection of Bain News to the journal. Sometimes you can see traces of wear and tear. The roto engraving process was less than 50 dpi at that point. So the transformation of the image is sometimes so intense that off-the-shelf system they have a really hard time finding similarities. So we know we have to find technical solutions to find the circulations, tracking the circulations of images with a bespoke system. An example here. So that's a raw negative, right, from that French news agency. And if you look at how the image was eventually printed, so we found it. Our system is already working a little bit, but Google Lens wouldn't work that good. There's too many transformation now, so maybe it's going to be better in 2 years, and we're going to be, left in the dust. But so far, there is a niche there for us technically to make sure we can track these similarities. So I'm going to take an example really quickly of how that can inform historical writing and answer very important questions. The images we're going to see are rather brutal, okay? It's based on the work of a colleague of ours called Pierre Schill, who is a specialist of the Tripolitania invasion by Italy in 1911. And he published a wonderful book on a set of images that denounced a massacre in the Shah al-Shad oasis in October 1911. So the Italians started to colonize Libya in September, at the end of the summer of 1911, defeated the Ottomans, and in late October, several Italian soldiers were killed in an oasis, the Shah al-Shad oasis, which is close to Tripoli, and immediately sought revenge, killing hundreds, probably thousands of civilians, executing them in the streets and in the oasis. And they didn't, at this point, there's no realization of what photography could do. They left some journalists on the ground to take pictures, right? So that's the first generation of photojournalists on the ground, freely moving around and taking pictures of what was going on. And then the pictures were sent to London and progressively became, it's kind of anachronistic, became viral to an extent. So Pierre started working just on the French version of this, right? The French reinterpretation of the massacre and the photos. But I asked him to look for more, and he eventually found 350 iterations of the images all around the world. So we're in 1911. We've got a shocking image, which is a reminder of what's going on right now, by the way. And that image, in a matter of weeks, is published all around, not all around the world, but it ended up in South America. We found traces of a print in Ethiopia, Ottoman press. So there's a circulation that was, I didn't expect it. I'm a specialist of the period. Such a massive movement of images was highly unexpected. One of the images that became viral is that photo of the execution of Arab civilians in the Oasis by Thomas Grant. He was the Daily Mirror photojournalist, sneaked away some of the pictures. They were sent by boat to London and very quickly circulated. We're talking in a matter of days. The photo was published a week after the massacre, published in France the next day, and we traced the circulation of these images. And you can see the different iterations of that image in the left-wing anarchist press, in the Ottoman press, in the French press, in the you've got different. We've got 300. So I'm not going to show it to you. So we decided to use that as a sort of ground truth data set to try and trace that images elsewhere. So the idea is really to use AI as a way to write an early history of photojournalism and that photo inflation, by trying to trace these duplicates and near duplicates, trying to understand as well the kind of words, how images were referred to, how images spoke in the language of the time. Because if you take the Ottoman version, it's one of the first anti-colonial denunciation of, so the image clearly became from something that could be propaganda, essentially, for the Italians, showing their capacity to kill and destroy opponents, became one of the first viral images to describe what imperialism could do on the ground in the Muslim world. So you literally had demonstrations in Palestine, Alexandria. I think Thomas Grant was beaten by Italians when he came back to England. People fought in New York. Between Italian Americans, and so there was really a sort of massive political consequence on this. And we're interested in tracing this, in tracing also the distortions, the words used. Another example is the execution of one of the civilians in Tripoli, and interestingly, the image was highly retouched. So we need to take that into account, finding technical solutions to trace that. We're not only interested in war, even if it's one of my specialties. We would like to trace the birth of many subgenres. Basically, you've got some of the founding genres that are created in the 1900s, 1910s, early celebrity culture. You've seen the beautiful Paula Negri here, which a very famous French actress at the time. Sports culture, fashion, so topic modeling is also interesting for us to understand what circulates, what's popular, what's retouched, and to make sure we get a clearer vision and survey of how that visual culture circulated. For the Petit Parisien, we've got a specific research question, so I'm just giving you examples of how we think about the articulation between history and AI. Le Petit Parisien was, during the collaboration with the Nazis in France, kept working, kept publishing. But their staff photographers took a lot of pictures of things they shouldn't have photographed. So it's not resistance per se, but they recorded too much, like soldiers in the streets, military material, military bases. And there was a very intense system of censorship that was in place. So what we want to be able to trace is what filtered out, right? So we have no idea what was published from the staff collection of photographs into the journal, and we're talking literally thousands of images. So we want to, by tracking similarities, by tracking duplicates, by tracking retouching as well, we want to try and see how we can make sense of that economy of censorship. So I'm going to talk about AI a little bit for the methodologies, just to illustrate some of the avenues of research. So I mostly talked about historical questions. Three basic avenues we're going to follow. We are creating a sort of synthetic approach to the archive to make sure we can find the continuous stone images in their transformation in the press. We are creating a sort of degraded version of the original images, right? So in synthetic data sets, trying to create the best series of degradation possible to get as close as we can to something that will function to find the retouched images in the press. So we've got an example of an image where we made one person disappear, and we tried to imitate in the data the kind of transformation that eventually led to the printed images, right? It's working pretty well so far in order to trace similar images. And we're going to publish an article about this, I think, in a month. Another approach, and Chantal mentioned that, is to find a sort of multimodal approach. We are not... we are okay at that point to use the vocabulary of the early 20th century to describe the images. We are actually interested in that, right? What we want to overcome is the historical bias between late 20th, early 21st century visual culture and early 20th transatlantic visual culture, right? There's a huge difference in words. There's racist vocabulary, the place names are different. So we want to make sure the data sets we're using to describe the images are not OpenAI, right? We'd like to make sure we can inform what is in the images with the vocabulary of the early 20th century, right? One possibility would be to track celebrities, for instance, but there are many, many other ways to do that. It's interesting because, as I said, Forbin and the others are using images that are not sometimes documenting the places that are written in the caption, okay? So you won't find truth in their words, but they are still very interesting in terms of understanding how images were made to speak in the early 19th century. It's also interesting in terms of similarities. What is a similar image in the press, right? Sometimes we have photo montage that are there. Sometimes we've got several photos of the same events the same day. For a historian, for you, what is it exactly the duplicate, or is it something else? Do you want to search maybe for images that are close enough in terms of motifs? So we are also thinking about what is ground truth for us, basically, right? And the last thing, so in terms of finding duplicates, quite randomly, actually, we used a two-step approach to find duplicates initially. So we used SimClear, which is a sort of traditional system, contrastive learning approach, to find similar images. So we got one continuous stone image, and we're trying to look for that image in the press, right? The system brings up 50 images that might be these images. We keep the first 10, and then we use re-ranking using a much more compute power consuming solution, which is called SIFT, which is based on visual features and points in the images. And one of the surprising results is that we found photo montages much easier. It's very hard to find, right? The engravers at the time would not always print photos. They would take several photos and mix them into a sort of AI composite images, and we would like to track that moment when photography is not completely dominant in the illustration. There's still some in-between gray area between photography and... do I still have time? Yeah? Yeah. 1 minute? 3 minutes? Okay, great. And it's very important for us, and I think it should, IMC is doing that. It should literally be part of all these projects. We need to think in terms of relocating the images at one point, right? None of these projects should be completely in the cloud, right? So we want to seize that opportunity to work on these collections to organize at least a very small exhibition. We've got limited means. So if you're around in 2027 in Paris, hopefully we'll design a small exhibition in the Château de Vincennes. If you're not going there, it's not very touristy, less people in the Eiffel Tower. wonderful medieval castle, right? Charles V's, one of the first early Renaissance, pre-Renaissance libraries that was located there. That's where the Forbin collection is. And in Louis XIV's decorated salon, we will have an exhibition just to socialize these images, to bring them back to life, to reactivate them materially, because we talked about objecthood, right? And I think it's important to recirculate, to make sure these images also have a very physical life for the audience, right? We don't want our libraries and our archives to be completely empty of researchers and students. They have to manipulate the images. They have to see them for what they are. And so we're gonna make sure our computer vision PhD students are going to be involved in designing systems to make sure the digital part of what we're doing is physically inscribed in the place where the collection is. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Daniel. It was a fantastic presentation. The floor is open for questions. All right, over in the back.
Hi, thank you for the fantastic presentation, and the project seems amazing. You were mentioning something that I believe is very interesting, which is the semantic shift. So a lot of time happens that somehow an image were published in a context and then it shifts to another context. And we cannot grasp that on the visual itself, but I was wondering if you are planning to maybe use the text around the image, in the context of the image, maybe extract it in order to track how the semantic shift happened.
Yeah, so one of the PhD students is trained in NLP and is very interesting in the visual features as well. So there's an entire PhD devoted to that specific question. We are going to start annotating some of the newspapers. What we want to find initially are the captions, which is not an easy thing to do. Because captions in L'Excelsior, which is one of the first French photo illustrated newspaper, it's a complete mess. The photo is here, the caption is here, and you're like, why? So we need to make sure the annotations help us connect the words used by Forbin, the words used by the newspaper, and it might prove a bit more difficult, right? But solutions like Clip might help if they're not biased in terms of training. Maybe the articles themselves, right? The words used in the articles to describe the situation could be interesting, but that's the second level. So we're moving small steps to make sure everything, we're obsessed with metrics, right? So no black box, open source, and we can document what, so metrics are a huge question, by the way. That's another discussion we might have this afternoon. But yeah, the idea is really to connect text and image, right? We're not looking at images, we're looking at infrastructures and text images. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your talk. I had a question about the newspaper sources. Two kind of questions. One, where are you finding all these open sources newspapers that you're searching for the images in? And the second, is there some form of limitation in terms of language or access in terms, obviously they need to be digitized, so that's gonna narrow the pool of where you're seeing things. And then also building on that, are you then tracking to see if the images are actually circulating from, like if it gets published in the New York Times, hypothetically, and then they have subsidiary newspapers that they're then releasing those images to?
So that's the idea. The Forbin collection is archaeological enough so that Gallica, which is the French database of the BNF, offers literally millions of pages we can explore. Library of Congress has this huge data set chronicling America that we're going to use. We are going to choose a selection of journals, right? The idea is that the system will work, but we're not going to be able to use the New York Times per se, for instance. But yeah, the idea is also to find pirated images, So we hope to be able to work with the team at the Serveti Funun. I don't know if you know that Ottoman illustrated newspaper, because Serveti Funun often reprinted images, so photos of printed photographs from l'Illustration, which is another French newspaper. So we have limitations, but enough samples to prove that the system will work, basically, right? We've got actually too many. So I didn't explain that, but we're gonna extract a lot of images, right? That's the idea. Using as less computing power as we can. It's very important for us to find the best mathematical solution. So maybe I passed a little too quickly here, but we're working with Mathieu Aubry. He's a brilliant mathematician from Ponts et Chaussées, and he developed a very simple platform. You can test if you want. We would be very glad if you want to test it, with modules to manage mass documentation. And we used it on very complex newspapers that are freely available, and the system is already working pretty well. And you can have a local instance of the platform, so it's on GitHub. It doesn't. I mean, if you've got thousands of pages, you need a good GPU on your computer. But it's very effective, very stable. So we want to make sure we're not using black boxes or stuff like this, right? It's very important for us. So two interns are going to develop a module for that to be able to extract caption and images, so related captions and images. And progressively around that system, we hope to be able to have a open source platform that can be easily used to extract photos from albums, recrop easily, right? And you can retrain the system as well. And it's based on YOLO 5, so it's not working well with a very old version of YOLO. So, yeah.
Thanks for your talk. Quick question: you talked about genre and subgenre as being a way of sort of tailoring vocabulary that would be applied. I'm wondering, could the same application, could the same narrowing and filtering of language be driven by things like provenance or socio-political origin of the collections to help sort of give it a context for the language used?
It's super important for us, specifically in the Forbin collection, because Forbin is sourcing his images. We don't really know him. Hopefully there's a great intern of ours worked on the collection, and she's going to do a PhD on Forbin himself, which, by the way, was a big fan of Canada. I just realized. He traveled Canada in 1927 and wrote a book. He spent his time in Canada. I just realized this, I was looking at Forbin Canada, and Forbin was bilingual in English, so that explains. But Forbin is clearly sourcing some of his images to create public outrage. So we really need to understand where he's sourcing the images, how, and who he bought the images from. During the First World War, he literally created a sort of network of amateur photographers to be able to avoid official censorship and try to sell. There's actually pretty brutal photos of corpses in the French press at this point, despite the censorship. And we suspect Forbin is playing a part in this. So it's very important for us to understand the channels, right, he used. So we're going to try and document that as much as we can. The photographers is talking with the different news agencies as well, the proportion of each of these news agencies, how much time it takes from creation of the image to reach Forbin and then to reach the French press or the international press. So we're going to do as much as we can to deconstruct that collection, but also other collections, right? The whole image agency is working pretty much the same way. And we have almost as little information in the early stages. So being obsessed as I am with colonial photography and war photography in general, I really suspect there's sort of shady intervention of the French military in how that moment, 1900s, 1910s, who is creating the images, how. There's definitely something going on, and I hope to find it. So I know, because we found a few examples of people that are in between the army, in between photojournalism, creating images, and I really hope that by tracing the images, we'll get to the bottom of this. So that's one avenue. That's one avenue I'd like to explore.
That can help facet the language. That's the point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Well, maybe can I ask a question? I'm really, really curious to hear more about messy data. Because like, especially from a visual cultures perspective, it's like, at first it sort of feels like an apology for data that isn't like tight or neat enough, but it strikes me that you're messy on purpose. And, you know, and I'm curious if this is like a category of data that you've constituted. Like, it's not an accurate representation of the complexity unless it's messy enough.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, totally. It's a great remark. Yeah. That's a good idea, by the way. Yeah, we should we should have a metadata category like mess. No, absolutely. That's. I think it's important for us as researchers, and so that collection is going to end up on the Ministère de la Défense platform for their collections. And we want some trouble in the data, right? Because part of the collection was actually digitized a few months ago on Algeria. I don't know if you know that, but the French government, in order to diplomatically say we are going to be transparent on our history, decided to scan all the images. And the metadata is completely random and neutral, right? So the vocabulary, we want to do the opposite of that, right? We want to make sure the data reflects to a certain extent that. So that's what we're not shying away from some of the racist vocabulary. There are ways to obviously put it into context. I don't know if you know about the debias project by Europeana, which is an automatic tagging of complex sensitive vocabulary to try and create immediate hyperlinks in the metadata so it can contextualize. But yeah, that's a great remark. It's absolutely something we want to do. Yeah.